Le spectateur français, moyen, les lectrices et lecteurs des gazettes, ont été choyés ces derniers temps par leur presse de référence, tant audiovisuelle qu'écrite, privée ou du service public. Et tout le crédit doit en être attribué à notre classe politique et médiatique, que le monde entier nous envie naturellement. À commencer par le premier d'entre eux, Manu, comme on l'appelle maintenant sur TikTok, qui s'est donné du mal pour gratifier ses concitoyens d'une abondance de feel-good news, comme on dit maintenant dans les rédactions. Pour cela, il a fait chauffer son carnet d'adresses et a rameuté ses confrères les plus classieux, notamment le pape et le roi d'Angleterre. Et il fallait bien ça, parce qu'il faut bien reconnaître que l'ambiance générale est assez morose, du moins parmi nos grands leaders du monde libre.
Et c'est la rencontre qu'on attend depuis le début entre le pape François et Emmanuel Macron. Oui, image historique, image très forte. Le pape François qui sort debout de cette Fiat blanche dont on parle et que vous voyez depuis hier avec cette approche d'Emmanuel Macron. Derrière lui, il y a Brigitte Macron et Benoît Payan.
Au-dessus de moi, Damien, il y a beaucoup de drones. Il y a également aux alentours des bateaux qui patrouillent, des policiers qui sont en civil, alors que je vois également le dérouleur du pape François qui est apporté peut-être par son majordome.
Il était debout, il fait l'effort. Là, je me demande, justement, je pense qu'il est transcendé par cet événement absolument extraordinaire de rencontre, de cohésion dans un monde qui est en plein désastre. Et là, cette rencontre, cette construction qu'il propose, c'est quelque chose d'inouï.
Mais néanmoins, dans les contacts, il y a beaucoup de chaleur humaine qui transparaît.
Il a parlé de tendresse.
Ensemble, notre potentiel est illimité. Ensemble, notre potentiel est illimité. Ensemble, notre potentiel est illimité. Ensemble, notre potentiel est illimité.
Is that climate change, biodiversity and poverty are interlinked. And here are the challenges we have to fix.
Ensemble, notre potentiel est illimité. Ensemble, notre potentiel est illimité.
Pour celles et ceux qui jugent que le nôtre, de leader Maximo, est assez pitoyable dans ce rôle de clown blanc au cirque des influenceurs, nous avons compilé une petite revue de presse internationale qui va peut-être un peu les réconforter. D'abord, en leur permettant de constater que nos amis canadiens, par exemple, ne sont pas forcément mieux lotis en matière de cuistrerie répugnante de leur classe politique.
Hello everybody, welcome to Alberta News and Views. You got to see this video with Justin Trudeau ramping up the Ukrainian crowd in Toronto. This is next level Justin Trudeau. Check this out.
It's challenging at times to see that. There is so much hardship and chaos all around us. Shifting geopolitical realities, backsliding democracies, challenges to the rules and the peace and the stability that we've seen for 75 years in this world, that has contributed to so much prosperity and growth and opportunities for so many, has been upended because Vladimir Putin decided that he wanted to invade a neighboring peaceful nation. He put an end to decades of prosperity, of stability, is trying to overthrow the rules-based order and make might right once again. We need to continue to stand strong against that kind of thinking. And it's not just for Ukraine, it's for all of us. Canadians know this is a question of right or wrong. Canadians know that, yes, it is incredibly hard for Ukraine to continue to stand against a Russian aggression. And let's be honest, it's hard for the democracies around the world who are there to support their citizens, who are investing for the future, who are challenged with a challenging economy around the world, to continue to step up as Canada has with close to $9 billion in aid for Ukraine. But we will, because the cost on Canadians, on our lives, on our world will be so much greater if Putin wins this war, that we will and have to stand every single day until Ukraine wins this war.
Oh my God.
The stakes are high for Canadians. The stakes are high for Ukrainians. The stakes are high for all of us around the world. This is a moment where we define ourselves for the rest of the 21st century. Did we stand up against authoritarianism? Did we stand up against those who choose to break the rules around the world? Do we stand up for what is right? We are Canadian. Of course we're going to stand up for what's right.
I can't take any more of his bullshit. That room is full of the most privileged Ukrainian business people in all of Canada. What the fuck is on Justin Trudeau's forehead? It's even worse from earlier today and yesterday. Somebody please comment and let me know what that is. Last I checked, Russia is self-sustaining and winning this war. Zelensky and Ukraine are losing support globally because of the money and how he parades around asking for it. I am not going to dive in too deep into the conspiracy rabbit hole and what is actually going on there. But Justin Trudeau has got to step down. It is getting embarrassing. Super embarrassing. Follow me on Substack. Like, share, and take care.
A Canadian parliamentarian is apologizing after a standing ovation was given to a 98-year-old veteran allegedly belonging to a Nazi division in World War II. The blunder took place during Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's visit to the country and address to Canada's House of Commons. Veteran Yaroslav Hunka, quote, stood and appeared to salute when he was recognized by House Speaker Anthony Rota, who introduced Hunka as a Canadian-Ukrainian war hero.
We have here in the chamber today Ukrainian-Canadian world veteran from the Second World War who fought the Ukrainian independence against the Russians and continues to support the troops today, even at his age of 98. His name is Yaroslav Hunka. He's a Ukrainian hero, a Canadian hero, and we thank him for all his service. Thank you.
As you can see in the clip, Rhoda's words received a lengthy applause and lots of waving from the floor, including from Zelensky and Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau.
Yesterday, Jewish groups condemned the honoring of Hunka, saying he had been a member of the Waffen-SS unit, which was comprised of Ukrainians, according to the Washington Post. Heinrich Himmler, who was a leading member of the Nazi Party in Germany, formed the Waffen-SS. The group was involved with mass shootings, anti-partisan warfare, and supplying guards for Nazi concentration camps. Rhoda apologized yesterday for what occurred on Friday, writing in a statement, quote, "I recognize an individual in the gallery I have subsequently become aware of more information which causes me to regret my decision to do so. I particularly want to extend my deepest apologies to the Jewish community in Canada and around the world. I accept full responsibility for my actions." The Friends of Simon Wiesenthal Center for Holocaust Studies said in a statement, "The fact that a veteran who served in a Nazi military unit was invited to and given a standing ovation in Parliament is shocking." Shocking, to say the least, Bree. I couldn't believe that. Almost a minute, it seemed like, of applause.
Yeah, if this were, I think, an isolated event, I think that it wouldn't cause as much of a viral impact the way it did over the weekend on Twitter, at least. But it does feel like part and parcel of a pattern. Sometimes I don't fault people involved. For example, there was that incident with Jon Stewart where he was giving a medal to someone who it turned out was affiliated with Nazis in some way.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think that, you know, a Jewish man knowingly did that,
Sure.
you know, but, you know, we keep losing track of the Nazis. And they keep turning up all over the place.
Nazis across America.
I mean,
I hope
and the
not.
New York Times keeps running, and various papers of record keep running photos of Ukrainian troops that include people with insignia,
Nazi
whether it's
regalia.
tattoos or
Yeah.
regalia, etc. And at a certain point, it's abutting this counter narrative that says, well, there's not a Nazi problem in Ukraine. That's only a Putin puppet narrative that's used to disincentivize people from wanting to support
and that may not be true.
Ukraine.
I mean, a lot of conservatives have been saying for quite some time that that is a problem in Ukraine, and a lot of folks on the corporate left, I'll put it that way, out of respect for you.
Just call them liberals. They're not on the left. They're just liberals.
The liberals have stated, oh my God, that this is just a conspiracy theory of Republicans buying into propaganda from Putin.
Right.
And here you go with Hunka being applauded by the entire Canadian Parliament, Bria. I mean, as someone who's worked for presidential candidates, I've advised members of Congress in the House and Senate. How in the world, Bria, did no one on the staff look this guy up? Not a single person.
It's very confusing. There's also this weird way that Russia is talked about. If we're talking about Russia and in the context of World War II, and you're talking about someone who was fighting Russians in the context of World War II, guys, did we not all do high school history? They were on our side.
Right.
The Russians were the good guys. Something like 20, I think close to 30 million Russians died in World War II. They took the biggest hit.
And people forget that.
27, I mean, it was devastating. And then we decided afterward, oh gosh, we want to do Cold War fighting. We can't let socialism win, so we got to start the smear campaign. But like, how quickly we forget. So the idea that, I mean, I don't understand how this can keep happening. And that combined with this other kind of Nazi problem where, look, I get a lot of pushback, you know, from Robbie and from some people in the audience if I want to raise the issue of why it seems like these Nazis also keep popping up at various shooting events that are being done by Nazis that say they follow prominent right-wing commentators like Tim Pool. There are Trump sitting down with Nick Fuentes and people who are kind of self-described supremacists.
Which he also didn't know in that case.
Sure. But again, how does this keep happening?
I mean, I don't know.
You know,
I don't know.
It feels like I understand conservatives as a whole not wanting to be tarred by the mistakes that are being made by a few.
Sure.
But it also feels like the response to when these incidents happen isn't a full-throated condemnation in many instances. of Nazism as an ideology. Instead, we've seen this from even Elon Musk. There's this argument that, well, it's not, that anti-Semitism isn't actually growing, that the Nazi movement isn't actually growing, that there's nothing to see here, folks. Which, I mean, people debate and dispute. Elon Musk is obviously arguing right now that the ADL is wrong about the increase of anti-Semitism and other kind of hate speech on X.
Yeah.
But it doesn't feel like there's a lot of, oh, if I'm Tim Pool and somebody shoots somebody on my behalf, like on my name, or says they like me, just say, oh, Nazism, gross, wrong, bad.
You know, that's an interesting point, but I have to say, I think most conservative people, I can't speak to individuals with large platforms or political leaders. I mean, you could even point to Ron DeSantis in Florida. A lot of people in the black community criticize him because he refused to say the guy was a racist directly. I don't agree with that. And when I travel the country, not only to major cities, but rural parts, because I do a lot of firearms related activities, people despise that stuff. And I hear from a lot of conservative voters who do not look like me, who say, we don't want this being representative of the party. We want to get rid of this. Those people don't speak for us. So, Bria, I can't speak to individual leaders, but I can absolutely say the overwhelming majority of conservative voters that I have spoken to, that I know, do not espouse those
I believe that to be true, which is part of why this is so confusing. I don't know why this keeps happening. I don't know why the photo editors at the New York Times and the like they should have a checklist, a Nazi symbolism checklist before they start writing. Because how many times can this happen?
But you know what, Bree? I would say I think we need to really pause some of the funding to Ukraine to investigate this. I understand from an international perspective why the U.S. is in the midst of this proxy war, and I don't want to get into Russia-China relations and all of those reasons, because that's not the root of this conversation. But I don't want American tax dollars going to a country that may have members of its armed forces that are proud Nazis. And I think most Americans would probably say, yeah, I'm with Shermichael on this. I don't want my tax dollars going to Nazis either.
And in fact, back in 2018, and I confronted Ro Khanna about this on an episode of my podcast maybe about a year ago, Congress did ban sending arms to Ukrainian militia that were linked to neo-Nazis. Back in 2018,
and now we forgot.
Before this war, this was a big enough issue that the House passed, it was tucked into a spending bill, a ban on U.S. aid to Ukraine from going to the Azov battalion. And now, subsequent to that, I think maybe last summer, last spring, Max Blumenthal, who frequently is a guest on this show, a journalist, he confronted Ro Khanna outside of Congress about U.S. funding to Ukraine on the basis that you voted for this years ago.
A few years ago.
You understood that this was years ago, and now everybody is linked arm in arm and saying Nazism isn't a problem in Ukraine. Look, I personally am a critic of how much spending is going to Ukraine. But even if I weren't, there's a way to make the argument that says we should fund Ukraine, but we have to be more careful about who is getting these weapons.
I mean, absolutely.
And they're not even doing that.
I mean, Bree, you said 2018. I can guarantee the Nazis didn't just dissipate between 2018 and 2023. But I think Congress is more vested in damaging Russia, the military-industrial complex, which I strongly support as a big Second Amendment guy. Those guys are vested in making a profit, which is nothing wrong with profit. But again, not to the extent of us sort of reaffirming Nazism by supplying them military arms and hundreds of billions of dollars. I mean, I thought we defeated the Nazis almost 100 years ago. And here we are, a new modern iteration of them. We're saying, well, we're going to overlook this, even though we didn't just a few years ago, because we want to cause harm to Russia. Again, we need to pause the spending, Bree. Look at what we looked at in 2018. What has changed? I would be willing to bet, Bree, has probably even gotten worse. Because if you remember, the Africans in Ukraine, how they would not allow them to board the trains. And it wasn't until that stuff hit the news in the West that Zelensky and others stepped in and said, wait a minute, we have to help get these folks to Poland. They went to the Polish border and they said everyone could come in but you. So clearly there is some issue in Ukraine that, in my opinion, is not in sync with our ideals as Americans.
I couldn't agree more. All right, we'll let you know if there's any follow-ups on that particular shocking story, and we'll have more Rising for you after this. Please do stick around.
Après cette revue des critiques anglo-saxons de la presse libre, il peut être rassurant, voire instructif, de prendre la mesure de l'odieuse propagande qui tient lieu d'information au-delà du nouveau rideau de fer. Parmi les steppes numériques dévastées par les hordes totalitaires à la solde du dictateur Rasputin.
That is one of the justifications for labeling Russia evil and continuing this proxy war against Russia. This is the head of Ukrainian military intelligence admitting that they are doing in reality what they are accusing Russia of in fiction. So this reflects the absolute lack of values and justification underpinning the West's involvement in this proxy war, their creation of this proxy war. And speaking of a lack of justification and values, let's talk about what happened in the Canadian Parliament. So Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky traveled to Canada. He gave a speech in front of Canada's Parliament, and then the Speaker of the Parliament had his own comments to make. And as he was talking about World War II, he introduced a World War II veteran. A World War II veteran who he himself said fought the Russians. He's a Ukrainian who fought the Russians in World War II, which means he is a Nazi, very clearly. If you know nothing else about World War II, let's look at Wikipedia. If you know nothing else about World War II, and you just glance at Wikipedia's entry on World War II, you read nothing of the actual article. Forget that. You could spend hours and hours reading all of that. If you just looked at this right here, this basic summary of World War II, and you go down to participants, if you didn't already know this, you see who the main Allied leaders were. It includes Joseph Stalin of the Soviet Union, which includes Russia, Franklin D. Roosevelt of the United States, Winston Churchill of the United Kingdom, who the Canadian head of parliament actually mentioned and was talking about. And they were fighting against the Axis, which included Adolf Hitler of Nazi Germany, Emperor Hirohito of the Empire of Japan, and Benito Mussolini of Italy. This was the Axis. These were the allies. And so if you were fighting against Russia, it meant you had to be at least one of these. And it turned out that this Ukrainian veteran that they then all gave a standing ovation to, turned out that he was actually a Nazi, a literal Nazi, who at one point had to do the Hail Hitler salute to actual Adolf Hitler when he was still alive, either in principle or in person. And I want you to watch the segment of this event hosting Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. I want you to watch it, see it, and hear it for yourself to truly appreciate what just took place in the Canadian Parliament. And again, it wasn't as if the head of the Canadian Parliament thought that he was a World War II vet who fought the Nazis, and then it turned out later he was a Nazi. He himself introduced him as someone who fought the Russians, which meant he had to have been a Nazi. Let's listen.
Your words today also remind us of another world leader who addressed both our houses during the time of war. In December 1941, during World War II, the British Prime Minister, Sir Winston Churchill, traveled to Ottawa and delivered an impassioned speech on behalf of his people to rally for the continued support for his country at war. It was a defining moment of history and one that must never be forgotten. We have here in the chamber today Ukrainian Canadian world veteran from the Second World War who fought the Ukrainian independence against the Russians and continues to support the troops today, even at his age of 98. His name is Yaroslav Hunka. And I was going to say he's in the gallery, but I think you beat me to that. But I'm very proud to say that he is from North Bay and from my riding of Nipissing-Temiskaming. He's a Ukrainian hero, a Canadian hero, and we thank him for all his service. Thank you.
And then following this section of the speech, he then began lecturing everyone in the Canadian Parliament about Western democracy. And let's be honest, genuine democracy requires an informed electorate. And if the head of the Canadian Parliament is this profoundly ignorant about something like World War II, who the participants were, and he, accidentally invited a literal Nazi into the Canadian Parliament and gave him a standing ovation, what does that tell you about the intellectual capacity of Western leaders right now in the West? And we keep hearing about how Nazis in Ukraine is a Russian propaganda talking point. If you mention this, if you bring this up, you're just repeating Russian propaganda. But we keep seeing these accidents happening over and over again. When the Western media goes into Ukrainian-held territory, they take videos or pictures of Ukrainian soldiers and they're covered in Nazi symbols. And now, what's the chance that you invite a World War II veteran to the Canadian Parliament? It turned out he was an actual Nazi. I mean, what are the chances of that happening accidentally? Unless Ukraine has a serious Nazi problem. And the other thing we always hear is that Ukraine cannot possibly have a Nazi problem because their president, Volodymyr Zelensky, is Jewish. Well, let's watch the video again and see what Jewish president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, did when the Canadian head of parliament introduced a World War II veteran who was fighting the Russians. Let's see what his reaction was. Standing and clapping for a literal Nazi. So if you want to know how Ukraine can have a Jewish president and the country still be completely infested, past and present, by Nazis, that is exactly how, because of the profound ignorance and apathy running across the entirety of the West and their Ukrainian proxies. And then one last article to take a look at before I wrap up this video. Let's look at CBS News. What US taxpayers are getting for their money in Ukraine. This is September 24th, 2023, so just yesterday. And it's all about how people are tired of this war. They're tired of Ukraine. They're tired of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. I think people are starting to get tired of all the scandals and corruption. They're getting tired of Nazis popping up everywhere accidentally. They want money that they pay in taxes to be spent in the United States. That's where it should be spent. This war is a proxy war being waged against Russia for the self-serving interests of Washington and Wall Street. It has nothing to do with benefiting the American people. And so there's articles like this coming out in growing numbers and also videos to try to convince Americans that no, we need to keep pumping money and weapons into Ukraine. Forget about Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, Vietnam. Forget about all of these abject failures. This time it's different. I think we can look at what's going on in Ukraine and we can see that it is not different. It is exactly like all of these other conflicts the US has gotten involved in. The US is on the wrong side of history. Canada is on the wrong side of history. The UK, the European Union are all on the wrong side of history. Instead of understanding this, seeing their policy fail in Ukraine, even from a practical point of view, and readjusting their policy accordingly, What they're doing instead is doubling down on the propaganda. So this is going to be a long and painful process. Just like the proxy war in Syria, Russia has proven that it has the patience and perseverance to prevail. They did in Syria, they will in Ukraine, and it's just a matter of us documenting this as it unfolds. If you thought this video was useful, please like and share. Think about subscribing. It's free to do and it helps the channel grow. Please check the video description below for other places you can find and follow my work if you're watching this on YouTube. That includes Telegram, where I post absolutely everything, including things I'm not allowed to post, either on YouTube or on Twitter. In the video description below are also all of the articles that I linked to and referenced in this video, as well as for ways you can help support my work. I do not monetize any of my channels. If an ad pops up, please feel free to skip it. It's not helping me out at all. If you do want to help support my work, please do so through Buy Me a Coffee or through Patreon. And to everyone who has been helping out, whether it's through one-time donations or donations month to month, even if you're just helping by sharing my work with others, thank you so much. That is what makes all of this possible. And as always, thank you for watching.
It is a massacre. Ukrainian conscripts sent on a suicidal charge are cut down along the front line.
RT's Murad Gazdiyev visits the Zaporozhye region to debunk the Western media's claims the Ukrainian army has breached Russian defenses. Also ahead. More than 80 protesters were arrested on Friday as demonstrations in Yerevan continued for a fourth consecutive day. Armenians are angered at the government for what they see as the surrender of Nagorno-Karabakh to Azerbaijan. Plus, Hungary slams Ukraine for not shipping a single gram of grain to Sudan. That's despite Budapest donating more than €3 million last year to help alleviate the humanitarian crisis in the northeast African nation. A very warm welcome. It's 5 p.m. here in Moscow, and this is RT International with the latest world news update. It's good to have you with us. Now, our top story: Russian forces in the south of Donetsk have successfully repelled at least 5 Ukrainian attacks this week. That's according to the Ministry of Defense. While Kiev has lost nearly 1,000 men and dozens of armored vehicles and artillery. A warning: you might find the following images upsetting. Footage shared by the Russian military shows the aftermath from a human wave of Ukrainians storming Kleshchevka. The village in Donbass has strategic significance for its proximity to Artyomovsk, a city Ukraine gave up in May. Kiev has reportedly lost 1,500 men there, 16 tanks, and dozens of battle machinery as its assault brigades retreated from the area to replenish troops. That's despite a top Ukrainian commander boasting just last week that his forces allegedly destroyed a number of elite Russian regiments in the region. Ukrainian officials and Western media have published similar reports claiming that Kiev forces have breached Russian defensive positions near the village of Verbovoye in the Zaporozhye region. Our correspondent Murad Gazdiyev went there to get the real picture of events on the ground. Again, a warning: you might find some images disturbing.
At the conclusion of President Zelensky's much publicized trip to the United States, a slew of Western media outlets have come out with headlines trumpeting Ukrainian successes on the battlefield, especially at a time when those successes are desperately needed after 4 months of grinding warfare. And it has been difficult to conceal the losses that Ukraine has endured during those 4 months of warfare.
Kiev is applying pressure across multiple fronts in southern and eastern Ukraine, and it has made notable progress. In August, Ukraine liberated the village of Robotyne, penetrated the first line of minefields, tank traps and trenches in the south. Early in September, Ukrainian troops began attacking the second line, an important step towards severing the land bridge connecting Russia with its troops in Crimea and Kherson.
Now, all of these reports are strikingly similar to what we heard at the end of August, and they are all citing the Ukrainian military about successes near Verbovoye, Zaporozhye, region. They all sound similar because they are exactly what we heard at the end of August, when indeed Ukraine first reached the defensive lines that they are now boasting about reaching. At the end of August, Ukraine ceased using military vehicles, tanks as well as armored personnel carriers, infantry, fighting vehicles, those vehicles that were supplied by the West and which burned all across Zaporozhye region. For 3 weeks since then, Ukraine has only used infantry assaults, so sent manpower, infantry, at defended Russian positions to break through Russian lines, and those haven't met with success. We were in the village of Verbavoye and traveled just outside several days ago when Ukraine resumed this tactic of mass armored offensives. And indeed, we filmed where the front line is, a scant kilometer or two past the Russian defensive line, the first Russian defensive line that they breached in August. There has been no progress since, and as a result of this latest Ukrainian offense. Indeed, as we were there, while we were there, 600 meters from us, a German Marder infantry fighting vehicle, as well as a Ukrainian BMP, were destroyed along with 11 other vehicles.
The sun rises over Verbavoye. It is here that Ukraine's much-hyped summer offensive broke. These fields are a graveyard for thousands of Ukrainian soldiers. But something is wrong. Smoke screens stretch for kilometers. They aren't Russian.
Wave, I'm Leo. Yes, I'm taking off right now.
Leo, in a nutshell, what are you going to do now?
Now I will look at where the enemy vehicles are moving in order to quickly hit them with artillery.
We are with a squad of Spetsnaz troops, 22nd Spetsnaz Brigade, Russia's elite special forces. Mars is the commander.
Wave, I'm Leo. I see vehicles, 3 units, 4, 5 units. I'm observing, ready to adjust artillery fire. Hit the 53rd point, I will lead.
In reality, there were many, many more. We did not yet know that this was just the first wave. After throwing out smoke screens, it was suspected that there were enemy vehicles on the move, and now we have now confirmed that there are 4 APCs, armored personnel carriers, and the Ukrainian tank. А какой танк известно, нет? Нет. Unidentified tank for now.
Anti-tank missile launched. All good.
Второй идет. Разрывы. A Ukrainian armored vehicle with about a dozen crew and troops on top takes a direct hit. Those still able run for cover. Others sprawl, injured and dying. Suddenly, a second projectile slams in. No one will help these injured. Their comrades will leave them here to die. Ukrainian infantry, disgorged by these APCs, is now on the retreat. At least one squad out of one vehicle is now retreating under fire. This isn't going well for the Ukrainians.
Look, 2 abandoned Max Pros. Some of their foreign junk.
A few hundred meters away, what appears to be an American-supplied Max Pro armored vehicle also burns. No one saw the contingent get out. It is a horrible end.
There it is, on fire.
Did you hit it?
Yes, there's smoke pouring out. Wave, I'm Leo. I confirm, point 71, 1 enemy vehicle destroyed.
What was destroyed just now?
Another enemy infantry fighting vehicle.
How many in total?
3 in 1 hour already.
Any infantry still moving there?
Infantry all destroyed with the vehicles. Can't see any survivors around.
It is a massacre. Ukrainian conscripts sent on a suicidal charge are cut down along the front line. But while Russian artillery reaps its deadly toll, Ukraine's guns target the defenders. Within direct range of vision, that was an American-supplied cluster shell, 155 millimeter cluster shell, detonating in that strip of forest over there. While it wasn't aimed at us, at that point, the Ukrainians hadn't yet found us. It was still sensible to take cover. Вот мы слышали несколько раз, пролетела и не разорвалась. Это что?
Ну, это вот дефекты. Многие боеприпасы встречаются, то, что не разрыв. То есть она просирает.
Ну, блин, что-то вот с кассетками прям очень часто получается не разрыв, да?
Да, не разрывы и присутствуют.
Вселяет надежду, когда разрывается над тобой. It had been just 2 hours since the Ukrainian attack began. In those 2 hours, 4 armored vehicles were destroyed, dozens of Ukrainian soldiers killed and injured, and it was just the start. The second wave was already on its way. Murat Gazdiev, RT, from Verbovoye, Zaporozhye region.
And more news from the Ukrainian battlefield. Kiev is now taking special care of military supplies sent by their Western backers. That's as Ukraine's military intelligence chief says foreign machinery, especially the promised Abrams tanks from Washington, should be well maintained and only used in operations that have been properly prepared.
They should be used in a very tailored way for very specific, well-crafted operations, because if they are used at the front line and just in a combined arms fight, they will not live very long on the battlefield. They need to be used in those breakthrough operations, but very well prepared.
Well, American Abrams tanks are getting individual treatment. Other Western vehicles seem to be on a different service plan, as German Leopards and British Challenger tanks are sent onto the battlefield right away, often doomed for destruction by Russian forces. Back in August, Western media reported that Ukrainian troops were blaming NATO instructors for the losses on the front lines, as infantry were only provided with very basic training. It seems that Western instructors were experienced in Middle East combat and unfamiliar with the territory and climate in Ukraine, making them unprepared for this conflict. Former US Marine and geopolitical analyst Brian Beletic shares his take on the Kiev counter-offensive prospects, saying they become murkier with each day.
I don't think Germany, the British, and now the Americans, I don't think any of them wanted to see large numbers of their tanks burning on the fields in Zaporozhye. They thought the offensive would go much better, and it didn't. They watched Leopard 2 tanks burn. They saw a Challenger 2 destroyed, possibly 2 destroyed, and now they realize that the very same fate awaits the M1 Abrams. Anything less than a year would have been entirely inadequate, and to build the units that they were trying to build, brigades with up to 4,000 men, that could take a year or more. And so they compressed all the training, and then they sent Ukrainians into this very difficult offensive operation that the United States would never find itself in. And they blamed the Ukrainians for not implementing their training properly. They received inadequate training. It really reflects very poorly on NATO. So it really seems like part of this realization that we see across the West and in Ukraine, that things are not going well, specifically about this offensive, and prospects into the future also don't look very bright.
Meanwhile, the Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky is in Canada meeting with Justin Trudeau. It follows his visit to the White House, with the US President Joe Biden reportedly agreeing to provide Kiev with a number of long-range missiles capable of hitting targets even deeper inside Russia. The decision came as so-called Ukraine fatigue overshadowed Zelensky's visit, with his request to address Congress being denied, with the House Speaker saying they had no time for a joint session. RT's Caleb Maupin has more details for us.
Now, Zelensky's visit comes as the world and U.S. leaders are watching the much-hyped counter-offensive in Ukraine. And it seems like all Zelensky has gotten from U.S. leaders is the promise of a few ATACMS missiles. That's according to U.S. mainstream media. It's not clear how many missiles have been promised or when they'll be delivered, and it's a bit of a consolation prize. There are still no Abrams tanks in Ukraine. Meanwhile, it's pretty clear Zelensky's not getting the welcome he had on previous occasions. 28 Senate Republicans, led by J.D. Vance, have signed a letter opposing more funding for Kiev, citing a lack of transparency.
The vast majority of Congress remains unaware of how much the United States has spent to date in total on this conflict, information which is necessary for Congress to prudently exercise its appropriations power. It is difficult to envision a benign explanation for this lack of clarity.
House Speaker Kevin McCarthy met with Zelensky privately and declined his request for a speech to a joint session of Congress. He said, "We just don't have time." Meanwhile, it seems like opposition from Kevin McCarthy and other members of Congress has been rising for some time. Here's what we've heard from Kevin McCarthy about Zelensky.
Is Zelensky elected to Congress? Is he our president? I don't think I have to commit anything. I have questions for him. Where's the accountability on the money we already spent? What is the plan for victory? I think that's what the American public wants to know. I want accountability for whatever the hardworking taxpayers spend their money on, and I want a plan for victory.
Now, last December, Zelensky was able to give a joint address to Congress, but this time he's having a much smaller meeting with a group of representatives. It's not clear whether or not he's going to get that $24 billion in additional aid he's requesting. He's been on Capitol Hill lobbying. Chuck Schumer, the Senate Majority Leader, said that if Zelensky had been able to give a speech to a joint session of Congress, he would have said that if he didn't get this money, it would condemn Ukraine to be conquered by Russia.
There was a single sentence that summed it all up, and I'm quoting him verbatim. Mr. Zelensky said, "If we don't get the aid, we will lose the war."
Now, the U.S. public isn't exactly thrilled about piling more weapons and funding into the country either. And it seems like while the Biden administration and its allies are trying to build up the image that there's support for funding the war, the fatigue is very much there. And journalist Seymour Hersh has revealed the real reason for that fatigue. Caleb Maupin, RT, New York.
Almost 50 people have been arrested in Armenia as the fifth day of protests in the country's capital have gone nationwide, with reports saying they've spread to other cities. People are expressing outrage with the Prime Minister, who accepted a deal between Azerbaijan and Nagorno-Karabakh, which gave Baku control of the region. RT's Ramon Kozarov reports from the scene.
The fourth day of the protest on the Republic Square here in the Armenian capital of Yerevan seems to be coming to an end. Just like in the last 3 days, it is ending with street cleaners coming to the square and cleaning up the entire area. Now, this was yet another difficult day, both for the protesters and for the police as well. Over 100 people have been detained in various streets here in the Armenian capital, and that included opposition figures as well. One of them is the son of the ex-president of Armenia, Robert Kocharan, who suffered a head concussion, and he is now being treated at a hospital. Now you can see behind me there aren't too many people left. Now usually this square fits about 75,000 people, and according to the opposition there were at least 50,000 people protesting in Yerevan on Thursday. Now let's take a look at the government building. The police are still in a full riot gear just in case the protesters will return here. Now in terms of the protest itself on Thursday, it was much bigger than in the last 3 days, and students from high schools, students from universities have also joined, as well as some cafes and restaurants as well. Now opposition is predicting that these protests are only going to grow in the coming days. Of course, their main goal is to remove Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan from power. This is their main demand. And of course, the protesters are very angry at the news of the last few days about the events in Nagorno-Karabakh. Now, the opposition said that the protest in Armenia should continue non-stop from this point on. Now, as far as Thursday goes, it didn't end with the violence as it did in the last few days. However, there was violence earlier in the day, but for now everything seems to be calm. We will continue to monitor the situation here in the Armenian capital. Roman Kosarev, RT, Yerevan, Armenia.
Nagorno-Karabakh's armed forces are handing over their military equipment under the supervision of Russian peacekeepers. The agreement was reached after talks between Baku and officials from the region after Azerbaijan's military operation. But there's no final deal on the reintegration process of the region, with more negotiations to come. Armenia's Prime Minister said Yerevan wasn't taking part in the talks but supports the document, while his Foreign Minister called on the UN to deploy a monitoring mission to the region instead of the Russian peacekeepers.
Mr. President, against this backdrop, time and again, I appeal to the Security Council to demonstrate its credibility and reputation by undertaking the following urgent measures: to immediately deploy an interagency mission by the United Nations to Nagorno-Karabakh with the aim to monitor and assess the human rights, humanitarian and security situation.
People in the Armenian capital have left flowers near Moscow's embassy in Yerevan in memory of the Russian peacekeepers who died in Nagorno-Karabakh. The Russian peacekeeping mission is overseeing humanitarian aid deliveries to the region. And Moscow says 50 tons of food supplies and other necessities have been delivered to locals. The peacekeepers have also evacuated over 5,000 civilians from Nagorno-Karabakh. We spoke to Ahmed Mustafa, director of the Asia Center for Studies and Translation, who said a UN mission might not be the best solution.
What a silly case or issue, because we don't think that the United Nations troops are intact and good enough, because we have a very bad history for them. Indeed, whether in Iraq, in South Lebanon with Israel, in some African country, in Somalia, in a lot of countries, and of course in Africa, especially in the countries that trying just to get rid of the colonialism of the Anglo-Saxon or the French colonialism or things like that, because all of them are just having a big tendency towards the Western countries, especially France or United States or Britain or Holland, as well as a lot of reports, and I'm an expert, and I was working with the United Nations before. They're already having a black track record in that respect, including, involving in, in igniting the chaotic issues. Therefore, how can we replace the Russian troops, who are the more appropriate and the proper party to monitor the borders or to stay in Nagorno-Karabakh, with, some people who are tarnished with a lot of moral, issues and a lot of bad things.
Not a single gram of grain has been shipped to Sudan from Ukraine. That's according to Hungarian Foreign Minister Peter Szijjártó. That's despite Budapest donating more than €3 million last year to help alleviate the humanitarian crisis in Sudan.
When the initiative dubbed Grain from Ukraine was launched at the end of last year, Hungary donated 3.5 million euros to export 10,000 tons of grain to Sudan. But despite the Hungarian taxpayers providing financing last year, not just a single ton, but a single gram of grain has not been shipped to Sudan from Ukraine as part of the Grain from Ukraine program.
The foreign minister claims the cause of the problems is a Ukrainian permit delay, even though Hungary's funds for the grain have already been paid. He says when the permit is issued, Kiev's grain can leave for Sudan, and he also stressed that it should be sent to countries most in need to help those starving in Africa, not to Central Europe. Legal expert and independent analyst Wilka Diaz says Ukraine is solely responsible for the grain being delayed.
If you look when the Ukraine government and the Russia government signed the agreement with the grain deal, the most part of that project, it's the final destiny is to poor countries. The poor countries we have around the world, in particular to the African countries. After 3 months, we see the different movement. The most part of that green deals, the products of that grains and etc. going to some countries in the Europe in particular. So the poor countries didn't receive that product. I believe the most responsible is the Ukraine government, maybe the Ukraine government with the partners. Ukraine is not the only country are sending the products for the African countries. We have Russia also on that agreement, but the people don't talk too much about the Russia products. If you see, for example, in Mozambique, we receive that products, but we don't see the same thing when we talk about the Ukraine government.
Well, the seed of discord has been planted as Brussels threatens to take legal action against EU member states over their unilateral bans on Ukrainian grain imports, though it still intends to defend Poland, Hungary and Slovakia, who refuse to allow Ukrainian grain to be sold on their domestic markets at the World Trade Organization in a lawsuit brought by Kiev. The temporary ban on Ukrainian grain exports, which allowed 5 EU member states to say no to Kiev, expired on the 15th of September. However, Hungary, Poland and Slovakia said that they will extend the ban to protect their farmers. Ukraine responded by filing a lawsuit with the World Trade Organization, commenting on the move by Brussels. Hungary's Minister of Agriculture said that the EU Commission is more concerned with Kiev than with its own member states.
The decision of the European Commission not to extend the temporary import ban is a serious problem. But the fact that the chairman of this body, Ursula von der Leyen, consulted on this topic not with the leaders of the EU countries, but with the president of Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky, raises certain political issues. EU leaders are elected by the member states. They are accountable to them, and they should support them. But instead, the interests of a completely foreign third country are more important to them than the interests of EU member states.
Warsaw has expressed outrage over what it called Ukraine's arrogance, voicing hope Washington would intervene in the grain dispute, adding that Kiev's insults at Poland won't go unnoticed. Poland's defense minister has blamed Ukraine's oligarchs for the grain dispute, saying Kiev cannot be allowed to sell its crops on the Polish market.
We protect Polish farmers, and I can assure you that as long as the Law and Justice Party is in power, it will be consistent. Despite the attacks, we are guided by the interests of Polish farmers. The idea is for Ukrainian oligarchs to sell grain on the markets where they were supposed to sell, and not on the Polish market, because this harms Poland.
Economist Ike Harmer says the EU's hardening stance on the grain import ban shows its growing control over member states.
The EU takes every chance to make the dictatorship power clear that they are in charge and that the countries have no rights to defend themselves, that EU dictates and the others have to follow. And they take every chance against anybody in the European Union to put this into motion. So before, normally it is that the member states have the sovereign power and they delegate it to the EU, and they try to put this upside down, that they want to form this European centralized state where the EU dictates and the member states have to follow. The EU, on the one hand, goes outside and acts a little bit cocky. We are helping our member states. Don't fight us. We are strong. We are 500 million people, and so on, the back and the forth. And within, they try to get this in order, the power in order, that they have the power and the member states don't.
Many thanks for your company here on RT International. I do hope you're having a great day wherever you are. We'll be back with more news in just 30 minutes.